Hi there, welcome to my video on using Quora for market research for your online course. So I want to look at some examples on Quora that are really effective and really trending topics to give you some examples of how you might approach your own market research process. So if I wanted to build a course on how to help people learn programming, and I've known that based on my experiences, and I've heard things from people informally at a meetup, but now I want to sort of pull the internet and survey them for wider answers. Instead of just saying what are the best ways to learn programming, I can also get people's attention and reverse the question and talk about what are the worst ways to learn programming. And the reason why this is effective is you can use this as part of your copy and selling points and value proposition later on by saying, these are some of the answers of the worst ways that people have learned programming through different boot camps, and here's why you don't need a boot camp, and here's why you can join my program. Here's why my program is different than some of the boot camps listed on here. So let's go look at this further in depth and some of the answers about why this is helpful. So this is a great answer because it's a very thorough answer and it's very comprehensive. It's outlined, it's bulleted, and it's bold so that everything is separated in heading so you can clearly see what are the worst ways to learn programming. And I think this answer does a really good job in saying the worst way to learn programming is doing it alone. It's not that you can't do it alone, it's just, that's how a lot of people do it, but teaching it in groups and learning it through a full-fledged program is really useful because you're not on your own, you're not trying to solve it on your own, but you have people that you can rely on. And then here are some more reasons why they outline you don't need to do it alone, because you learn by teaching, you need to ask for help, collaboration, motivation doesn't always come from within, and many, many more. And here are all the reasons why coding boot camps are really popular, because people don't want to learn alone. And that's the worst way to learn programming, is learning it alone. And let's look at some of the other answers and why these answers are effective. And so this one is really helpful as well, because you can tell they've researched it, they put a lot of thought into it, and they talk about it's not just about copying code, but the fact that there are lots of solutions online. And that's the problem with learning code, is that people copy the solution and they don't really learn the fundamentals. And so those are some of the points that you will want to highlight in your value proposition, that a lot of times most courses will teach you how to copy the solution, but really they don't teach you how to work through the solution when you get a problem. And that might be helpful to know, because when you're approaching and in your first job, you will get coding challenges where you don't know how to solve because you've been copying solutions all your life when you learned. And then working backwards, which really just kind of leads you to sort of depend on the solution rather than looking for a solution. And then and this is a great, example of what are the problems they highlight with what's the wrong way to learn code. And so they've talked about, copying code, limiting yourself to the syllabus. And then they also highlight the most important skill is just being patient, that you can get stuck for hours on end on a problem. But the most important thing is to keep trying, look at different ways to solve the problem, and ask for help. And I think this is a great way to sort of highlight where the wrong ways to learn programming is not asking for help and just looking at the solution from a very generic lens. And then we can continue looking at other, problems with how people are learning code the wrong way. And so this is a great one. They've said endlessly researching technologies without spending time writing code. A lot of people don't learn code ineffectively because they're not writing code, and they're more like researching information about code. So also, this is a great one. Treat learning to code like studying for a test. Let problems in your code pile up without checking if it's actually working. And then overlook the difference between a capital letter and a lowercase letter. And I might also add syntax is really useful. I used to make a lot of mistakes with commas, spacing, and those are really wrong ways programming and learning to program is by making, not focusing on getting those little mistakes and little details accurate. And so I've illustrated, I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you can see, these are very comprehensive answers. And these are great answers to highlight that you can use in your own copy and sales page. But most of all is just the idea of working backwards from this example. So the idea of working backwards is taking the comments that people have shared and using that to build the kind of course that really solves these kinds of problems. So we know that a lot of people spend time in courses actually researching without actually writing code. So how are you going to solve that problem in your course? How much of it is actually practicing writing code and writing good code versus actually just learning to copy solutions? People who treat code like studying for a test and memorizing details rather than understanding the big picture of how programming works. That's the wrong way to learn programming. So that's another question for you of how you will address learning to code from a big picture framework rather than trying to memorize details like you are studying for a multiple choice exam. And then last but not least, something that you can address in your course is code errors in your code that pile up without checking to see if it's actually working. And this is something that you may want to focus on is how do you as a new programmer check for problems in your code before it gets to be a bigger issue. And so these are probably fundamental questions that you'll want to address in your course because you see that these are the things that people want to know. And then once you start narrowing down what are these solutions, you can follow up in this post. You can message these people and say, well, would you agree that this is a solution to learning code from a big picture framework and suggest some ideas? Maybe you have some experience, maybe you have examples. And then and then this one, if you say, well, if people tend to let their code pile up without checking if it's working, and the best way is to sort of check every 50 lines or 15 lines, an example, you may want to follow up and ask them if that's a solution. So really looking at all these pain points and these challenges and these dilemmas and saying, well, what's the best way to solve that? What is the best way that I can solve that in my course? And how can my course be the course that solves this big overarching challenge of learning to program in this field? And so that's really the idea about how you can use Quora is that working backwards. I think the whole framework behind this video and method behind this video is really working backwards. Looking at some of the questions that exist on Quora for the field and area that you're building a course on, see what the challenges are, contribute to the conversation, follow up with people, and then getting people who are interested in the same subject to join your email list and continue to deliver the kind of high-level value and quality content that people are looking for. So I hope this was helpful, and leave a comment or question if you have any questions or further thoughts about this tutorial. Thanks again.